is I'm going to hand over to our main speaker today, which is Robert Marx. But just before I do that, I just want to do an introduction, if that's okay with everybody. If you missed me say at the beginning, use the chat function whenever you like. You can add your comments or your observations, questions in there, and feel free to do that. It's not often you get the opportunity to be together in a space like this. So there might be somebody on the screen you haven't seen for a while. So use that chat function to reach out to them and say hello. You know, it's not often we get the opportunity to be together as a field in this way. And yeah, the session's been recorded as it always is so that we can share it afterwards with those that are here and those that maybe didn't make it today but wanted to be here. And if you've not seen me before, I'm Steph. I'm the director for Bamba. So it's great to have you here. And we look forward to this session and sharing this space with you. But let me just introduce Robert a little bit more formally. Robert and I actually know each other. We worked together when Robert excuse me a second, sitting in the chair seat for Bamba as the lead trustee, the chair trustee, just a few years ago. So it's great to have you here, Robert, and to be in your company again. But Robert's the lead consultant, a clinical psychologist and psychotherapist. And has been involved in running mindfulness groups for staff and for patients for a number of years, and in fact coming up for 20. So started around that kind of 2006 mark. Robert leads the national MBCT in the NHS Talking Therapies training. So that's a pretty major role, right? So leading the MBCT in talking therapies training within the NHS. But he also teaches mindful self-compassion groups to staff, and with Professor Clara Strauss, and some of you might have heard of that name or come across Professor Strauss, developed the SMC, so the Sussex Mindfulness Centre Compassionate Leadership Training (CLT), and that's been delivered to leaders across a number of different organisations, various organisations. So that's an introduction to Robert. I'm going to hand over to you now, Robert, for you to take the floor and lead us through this session. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Steph. Really nice to be with you and everybody else. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, great. Yeah, and thank you for coming and for your time. I'm sure you're all super busy, so appreciate you joining. What I thought I would do is just, if we start with a very short practice, and then I'd like to present a few ideas to you around compassionate leadership, include a few reflective exercises, short exercises within that, and then hopefully, if the time is right, then a little bit of time for discussion at the end. Hope that sounds okay to everybody. And we'll try and keep an eye on the chat, but I'm not brilliant at that, actually, so I'll try to do that. Okay, so let's just take a few minutes of practice, if that's okay. So so intentionally allowing yourself to arrive in this moment, and opening to what is here for you in this moment. What's this moment feel like? And just letting yourself give a bit of attention to what's foremost in your experience, maybe body sensations or emotions, thoughts. Perhaps feeling into the energy of what's here, noticing how it is. Does it feel grounded? Does it feel jangly? Are you still moving off the motorway? and offering yourself the kindness of allowing it to be as it is. So, not trying to change it, make it better in any way, just allowing your experience to be as it is. And then if it feels helpful, just allowing your attention to rest in an anchor point for a few moments. Maybe your breath in your belly, maybe your feet on the ground. Allowing yourself just to simplify, to return to this place, not to have to do anything else. And then to broaden out your attention into your whole body. And perhaps having a sense of your experience held in a bigger perspective. Perspective of the whole of your life, perspective of your values, perspective of your intentions, that which makes your moments meaningful. Just having some sense of being connected to that, connected to what means something to you, what's precious to you in your life. And then just letting the formal practice go and keeping the thread of awareness, coming into seeing everybody else on the screen. Welcome if you've just joined. Right, so yeah, as Steph was saying, I'm part of Sussex Mindfulness Centre, and we're a group of researchers, teacher trainers, and teachers of mindfulness and various compassion-based approaches, which are delivered primarily either in clinical settings in the NHS or in workplaces, mostly in the public sector outside of our own organisation, which is our what we sit within a NHS Trust, Sussex Partnership NHS Trust. So most of my experience and what I'm going to talk about relates to some extent to healthcare. So apologies if that's not where you sit. Hopefully enough of it will be generalizable beyond that to be useful to you. But I just own that that is where most of my experience has been. Um, and yeah, as Steph was saying, we've been running mindfulness groups and more recently compassionate groups for quite a number of years now. So I'm going to share a few slides. I'll talk through those, and if you've got questions and whatever, I will try and leave some time for that a little bit later on, but I'm going to just try running through the slides for now, if that's okay. So let me try sharing that. Yeah, okay. Can you see that okay? Great, thanks. So let's just start with compassion. What are we talking about here? Apologies, I'm sure this is all pretty familiar to you, but maybe worth just restating. So I like Paul Gilbert's definition, sensitivity to suffering in yourself and others with a commitment to try and alleviate and prevent it. And most definitions of compassion have these two components to them, if you look in the literature. So there's some kind of empathic resonance with your own or others' suffering, and then some intention to try and respond to it and reduce it. So I think that's really helpful definition. These other sort of points are also really helpful and feature in our program to some extent, but I think it's really helpful to remember them. I find them very helpful anyway. So Chris Germer's point that compassion is goodwill, not good feeling. So quite often people get stuck on kindness and compassion practices because they are not feeling what they think they should be feeling when they're doing them. And that doesn't mean that they're not compassionate. I've plenty of experience of that myself, of doing a kindness practice and not really feeling it, often when I'm tired or stressed. But although I might not be able to generate the warm feelings all of the time, I can usually connect back into my intention of goodwill. So that can be a really helpful anchor. And a similar point made by Brené Brown that compassion is a commitment. It's not a virtue, it's not a feeling. It's something we can choose to embody, choose to align ourselves to, choose to practice. And then a final distinction that I think is also very helpful and that we use quite a bit in our program is this distinction between yin and yang compassion, which Kristin Neff in particular has made quite a lot of in her recent book, Fierce Compassion. So this is the idea that yin compassion is the tender, gentle kind of compassion that we maybe more immediately think of when we think of compassion, which of course is very important. But there's also this other kind of yang compassion, which is, assertive, protective, courageous, and it's the kind of compassion of a firefighter or a parent struggling to put food on the table, that kind of compassion. So why compassionate leadership? So that's not all coming up. There we go. So we've been running mindfulness groups for individual staff in our organization for quite a long time, and we've got a good track record, and we can show that those really do help majority of individuals consistently. However, in the last few years, we've been particularly aware that it's actually not enough really just to focus on individual well-being. We really need to attend to systemic issues as well. So these nice guidelines that came out here in 2022, the NICE guidelines for mental well-being at work, rather strikingly, I think, say that all employees should be offered mindfulness on an ongoing basis. That's the quote on the right in purple. I must say, if I'd written them, I wouldn't have written such a such a pervasively positive view of mindfulness. But anyway, they have done that, so they think everybody should get mindfulness. But that's at the individual level. They also make clear that at the organizational level, there's a need to foster positive, compassionate, and inclusive workplace environment and culture to support psychological safety and well-being. And if you look at, for example, here, this publication from the Mayo Clinic, they suggest that actually in terms of impact on reducing burnout, 20% of the impact comes from individual interventions, things like, mindfulness groups for individual staff members, for example, whereas 80% of the benefit comes from systemic interventions. And you can see there, you might be able to see there down the bottom, those include things like, developing a culture of wellness, endowed programs in well-being, strategic investment, shared accountability, and things like that. So this is from the same book. So nice quote here. Many believe burnout of healthcare professionals to be the result of individual weakness, when in fact burnout is primarily the result of healthcare systems that take emotionally healthy, altruistic people and methodically squeeze the vitality and passion out of them. Hopefully that hasn't quite happened to all of us. So this is a few headlines over the last year, pretty much the last year. It feels like they come out every week, these kind of things, but certainly these are over the last year of examples of things in the press that illustrate poor and uncompassionate culture in the NHS. And we know that, well, from this, at least from this review, that one way to change that kind of culture, to make it more compassionate, is compassion training, providing that it becomes a key component of the infrastructure and vision of healthcare organizations. So in other words, that it becomes kind of embedded systemically in the organization. So, what's the evidence for this? Why would we think that compassion training would make a difference to the culture? So a lot of these studies come from two or more books that I would strongly recommend. One is Michael West's book called Compassionate Leadership, which we use heavily in our program. And the other one is a book called Compassionomics by Stephen Trezniak and Anthony Mazzarelli. It's a whole book on the economic argument for compassion-based approaches and culture. So I'm just picking out here a few choice examples that I particularly like. First of all, from healthcare. So I particularly like this one, having myself had a spine operation not that long ago. I particularly resonate with this first one, that surgery patients who received an extra visit from the anaesthetist before their surgery, with the explicit purpose of offering compassion prior to the surgery, that group, compared to those who didn't get that extra visit, needed 50% less opiates after their surgery, and they were discharged from hospital significantly sooner. And similarly, the patients who got compassion-enhanced care from the nurses after surgery rated themselves as having 50% less pain than those that didn't. And then another interesting one, actually, that those patients then, when they went home, if they went back to harmonious relationships as opposed to conflicted relationships, their wounds actually recovered more quickly, 17% more quickly, which is quite amazing. And then diabetes patients of doctors who were rated as more compassionate had 80% higher optimal blood sugar control, and HIV patients of doctors rated as highly compassionate had, in one study, 33%, in another study, 62% higher adherence to their therapy, and a 20% higher chance of having no detectable virus in their blood. So these are quite striking statistics, I think. So usually when we're making the case for this kind of thing, the most compelling thing is economics. I think a lot of those things that I just quoted have economic consequences. For example, compassionate care has been associated with 50% fewer referrals and readmissions, and with quicker recovery rates, fewer clinician errors. I was interested to read that perceived lack of compassion in doctors is actually the main reason why patients decide to either complain or sue their healthcare providers. And that there's an inverse relationship between compassion and burnout in healthcare. And then, examples of burnout are things like doctors becoming depersonalized, that sort of feeling detached and separate from their patients and from themselves. Those doctors were much more likely to make major errors, and emotionally exhausted doctors were much more likely to also make major errors. So obviously those major errors, apart from the consequences on patients, which are obviously very significant for those patients, also cost the NHS about £2.5 billion. And then if we take things out of healthcare a little bit and just more into the corporate sector more generally, then there's various studies suggesting that there are associations between compassionate leaders and various qualities in the teams and services that they lead. So including more innovative and creative problem-solving teams, teams that are higher on cooperation and collaboration, increased commitment and reduced absenteeism from staff, reduced turnover, increased engagement, and improved well-being in teams with leaders perceived to be more compassionate. And by contrast, authoritarian leadership styles may affect the team's psychological self-confidence and reduce performance. Okay, so let's just do a brief exercise around this, if you don't mind. If you'd rather not do this, do feel free to sit it out. It won't be very long. But if you like to just sort of sit back, you might want to close your eyes for this. I'd just like to guide you in a very short reflection, just to make it a little bit more real, based on our experience rather than necessarily the research. So I'd like you to just take yourself back in your mind to a time when you worked in an environment that you felt was not very compassionate. Maybe just think of a situation that you were in a work situation that did not feel very compassionate to you. And maybe just bring it to mind, maybe remind yourself of what you were doing and who was involved and who was managing you and that kind of thing. And just ask yourself a few questions. How much did you enjoy working there? How loyal did you feel to the organization or the employer? How productive were you? And then just let that one go. And then I'd like to invite you to bring to mind an organization or a workplace that you were in that you felt was compassionate, or at least somewhat compassionate. And again, just try and make that, connect with it a little bit. The people, the manager, the team. And just asking yourself the same question. So how much did you enjoy working there? How loyal did you feel? How productive were you? Okay, thank you. So maybe just might be nice to hear from one or maybe two people. Anybody want to share anything that came out of that? Anything surprise you or interest you about that? Or maybe not surprise you? Or you could put something in the chat if you prefer. Yes, Jane. Hi.
It's not surprising because it touches on what we were saying earlier about some of the evidential stuff. When I was working in an organisation that where it was not really a compassionate approach. I felt like a resource. I didn't have connection. I felt used. I started to feel hostile. I felt quite isolated. I didn't, I worked hard, but the sort of, I suppose, the loyalty decreased. And my, ability to kind of bounce back and be more kind of agile decreased. So, and converse that with somewhere where I am now, which is very different. I feel, even though, I'm really busy, but there is my emotional state is kind of respected. And therefore I can kind of express the whole of me. And so I feel less isolated and less compartmentalized.
Fantastic. Thank you. You've just summed up the whole presentation, so thanks very much. We can all go now. Thank you very much. Time for one more. Annie.
Hi. Yeah, what surprised me, I guess, was how quickly, as I was remembering and recalling an organisation that was really quite stressful to work in for me, was how much the physical sensations, that feeling in the pit of my stomach came back. And I can remember feeling that as I walked through the door in the morning, that tension. And what I now understand after years of training in mindfulness was that I was obviously in fight or flight mode, pretty much all the time.
Mm.
And then the contrast of being able to be at ease with yourself, walking into a different organisation, a different team, a different management approach. Yeah, really quite stark. I kind of know it on a logical level, but to feel it as I was reflecting was quite, wow. Yeah.
That's great. So yeah, it's a really visceral experience. It's
For sure.
Absolutely visceral. Thank you so much. And just keeping an eye on the chat. Yes. Okay. Yeah. Thanks for your comments, Sarah. Yeah. Yes, yeah. So compassion is a precious resource when we do find it, right? It's really worth so much. Okay, I'm sure you've got lots more to say, but I'm going to carry on if that's all right, and I'll pause again a bit later on. So I'm going to just try go back to the presentation. Steph, can you see that? It should say reflective exercise. Yeah, perfect. Okay. So if we carry on with this, so if we move on a little bit more to the actual compassion training, we base our program, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a minute. We borrow quite a lot from a number of people, including some of the elements of these programs, which you'll probably be familiar with. So there are a number now of 8-week and other compassion-based programs. So the first one here is Compassion Cultivation Training, developed by Thupten Jingpa and Stanford University. There's an RCT, randomized controlled trial, suggesting that program helped people develop compassion for others and receive compassion for others and self-compassion. The Mindful Self-Compassion program developed by Kristin Neff, Chris Germer, in the States, again, there's one RCT showing large increases in self-compassion, mindfulness, and well-being, which those gains maintained at follow-up. And then MBCL, Mindfulness-Based Compassionate Living, RCT. I know there are some of you here who teach that, showing depressive symptoms reducing in that population. And then there's a review here of loving kindness meditation practices, including Barbara Friedrichsen's program and others. And that shows improvements in affect, reductions in distress, improved positive thinking, relationships, and empathic accuracy. So this is our program. It's a couple of years old. We borrow heavily from Michael West's book there, which is on the left, Compassionate Leadership. We attended a number of compassionate leadership trainings before we put this together, and they all had a lot to offer, but they were also all quite information heavy and quite conceptual. And whilst that was very interesting and informative, and in some ways useful, for me at any rate, it didn't sort of fundamentally stay with me or change my practice. So I guess what we were looking for is something that really not just kind of is convincing conceptually, but actually changes the way people relate to each other. So our course is very experiential. We have a lot of mindfulness and compassion-based practices. Well, I'll talk a little bit more about what's in it in a minute, but it's a very experiential focus. Some people really like that. Some people are quite surprised and taken aback by that, but that's how we framed it. We put quite a lot of attention on intention. So the intent, as you saw in the first slide there, that the kind of, it's goodwill, not good feeling. It's a commitment, not a virtue. So it's kind of, it's really honing in on your intention for how do you want to be at work? What are the values that actually sustain you? Even when it's difficult and stressful and so on, actually, can you still connect with that intention? And often people can connect with their intention actually when they first started off doing healthcare work. They can remember the time when they really wanted to make a difference and they really wanted to help people in what might seem a slightly naive way now, but which had a real gem of good intention behind it, which sometimes can get lost a bit in the busyness and stress of the years that follow. So then, as I said, we lean heavily on some of these compassion-based programs. We wanted something that also focuses on compassion for others as well as self-compassion. Actually, our program seems to be more effective at generating self-compassion than compassion for others. But we do have exercises in there that really help people to think about compassion for others, as we think that's essential. And we've got a mixture of formal practices and things that people can try out in work as well. It's a 6-week program that we have, and we base each session on the well, 5 of the 6 sessions on the 5 prongs of the definition of compassion that my colleague Clara Strauss, who Steph mentioned at the beginning, she developed this kind of definition of compassion, which is empirically based. And there are these 5 components: recognizing suffering, understanding the universality of human suffering, feeling for the person suffering, being with uncomfortable feelings, and being motivated to act to alleviate the suffering. So that is a you know, a slightly more sort of expanded version of where we started with Paul Gilbert. There's 2 components of empathic resonance with suffering and response to it. So our program is a 6-week program, 2 hours in each week. It can be done online or face-to-face. It's as I said, it's a heavy leaning on experiential side of it. We spend quite a bit of time addressing skepticism and misconceptions about compassion, which I don't really have time to go into so much today, but I'm sure you're familiar with those things. People tend to think compassion is weak or wishy-washy, or you know, it reduces good performance or things like that. So we address those things, which are all misconceptions. We use a variety of practices and reflective exercises. We keep refining it as we go along. We're bringing in more and more role plays as we do that. So we want this to be really relevant to people in their real work situations. So we have a role play, for example, for a leader or manager or supervisor having to tell the person that they manage that their work is not at the standard that they expected it to be at. So that type of situation that you would think might be quite difficult to bring compassion into, we try and explicitly address those kind of situations, and people get to practice how to do something like that with compassion. One of the things people often comment on is the yang side of compassion that we bring in, and they're quite surprised to discover that compassion can be about courage. And in particular, we have an exercise where we get people to practice speaking truth to power. So letting a senior colleague know, or speaking out when a senior colleague is being dismissive to a junior colleague, for example. So we role play a meeting in which something like that happens, and people get to practice how to call that out. We invite people to, we don't call it home practice, home inspirations, which include a mixture of practices, videos, readings, reflections, things to try out. And then when people finish the course, we have a monthly drop-in. Anyone who's done the course can just drop in for an hour a month to continue the work and talk about issues. And then we have various other events, compassion-based events and retreats and things people can continue with. So this is very much linked to another strand of work that's happening in our organization around making people feel psychologically safe. I think it's very closely allied to compassionate culture. You know, how much actually do you feel safe challenging senior people in your organization? How much do junior people get explicitly invited in to comment on things? You know, how safe is it to speak out? How safe is it to share the mistakes that you make? How much do people take responsibility for things? For example, if they have dodgy WhatsApp messages, do they blame journalists for that, or do they hold up their hand and take responsibility? And these, you're probably very familiar with Paul Gilbert's 3 systems. This is one good way of explaining how people may or may not feel psychologically safe. They may be very much particularly in threat mode, where they have to censor things, they have to appear to be different from how they are, they have to get stuff done, and there's very little soothing where it might feel, which is the sort of system where people might feel safe. And we talk a little bit about imperfection. It's quite funny to see quite a lot of, leaders sort of joining this program expecting to sort of outperform each other. And we try and make it clear right from the beginning by sharing as much as we can all the screw ups that we ourselves make and things that we get wrong, that actually good leaders are not about, in our view anyway, performing fantastically. It's actually also got more to do with being able to make use of your imperfections, your idiosyncrasies, cracks are where the light comes in. And this idea of wabi-sabi that is so beautiful from Japanese culture, that, it can be the imperfect, the asymmetrical, the impermanent things that have the most beauty. And, along those lines, rather than sort of being slick and, appearing to have everything sorted out, I was really interested to read from Michael West's book that actually his view of the 4 qualities of a compassionate leader are, basically very simple things, attending, understanding, empathizing, and helping. So those are the key things in his view. Okay, let's do one more exercise. So again, this is sort of reflective exercise. I'd just like to, you might want to have a pen and paper to hand. You don't have to write anything down, but if something comes, you might want to jot a couple of things down at the end if you want to. So if you've got that to hand, just have that ready. And then drop back into your body, just being present in this moment. And I'd like you to bring to mind the team or service or sort of immediate group that you work in. And if that doesn't apply to you at the moment, then maybe the team or service that you've recently worked in. And I'd like to invite you to imagine that when you go to bed tonight, a miracle happens. And when you wake up tomorrow morning and you go to work in your team or service or organization, you find yourself in the most compassionate workplace that you can imagine. What sort of things would you be noticing if that had happened? How would people be with each other? What would they be doing or not doing? What would the environment be like? How would the team or group be structured? What would motivate it? So now I'd like to invite you to imagine that that situation, that miracle situation, is a 10 on a scale of 0 to 10. And I'd now like you to go back into your team, the real team as it is now, and rate that team in your mind on a scale of 0 to 10, where 0 is not compassionate at all, and 10 is that miracle situation. So where is your team now on that scale of 0 to 10? And then if that team were to go up 1 point on that scale, so not up to the miracle, but let's say your team is at a 5, what would need to happen for it to go up 1 point to a 6? What would need to change for it to go 1 point up on that scale? Maybe think of 1 or 2 things. And just as we bring that exercise to a close, if you want to jot down those 1 or 2 things, then feel free to do that. No need to if you don't want to, but you might want to remember. And let's just open it up for, maybe we don't have a huge amount of time, I'm afraid, maybe one bit of feedback from that, if anybody wants to say anything. No? Okay.
There's one hand up and there's a comment in the box, Robert.
Oh, sorry, I'm not saying. Yes, John. Hi, John.
Hi. Yeah, that made me laugh.
Okay.
It's great. It's taking the time to think about a particular environment that I work with at the moment, and very much similar to the comment that's there. The leader is the change that came to mind. But then I was immediately flung into a little back and forth about, okay, so how big is the change? And if that change is too big, what is the small change? What are the steps? And it was really interesting, little incremental. So I went 0.1, then I went 0.2, 0.3. So yeah, thank you for that. That was a really interesting exercise that really focused me on so much of the difference the leader makes.
Yeah, interesting. But were your 0.1 or 2 changes, were they about the leader or were they other things?
No, they were other things,
Other
actually.
things. Yeah.
And what I recognized was thinking about the leader downplayed those, because they weren't really 0.1, but in relation to the biggest change that I perceived to be of benefit.
Yeah.
Then suddenly they seemed insignificant until I was given the opportunity, which you did, gave me the opportunity just for a little bit of space to think about it. And yeah, they grew.
Very interesting. Thank you. And yes, comments in the chat about the leader and having challenging conversations which have honesty but reflect being fully seen. Yeah. 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 Fantastic. Okay. Thank you very much for those comments. So I've nearly finished my presentation. I'm just going to very quickly finish it off and then we'll have maybe 5 minutes to talk. So yeah, I'll go through this very quickly, but just to give you a quick idea, this is our program. We've done it for 5 cohorts now, over about a year and a half, just under 60 people. So it's not a huge group, but we each time we do it, we give everybody quite a large battery of measures, qualitative and quantitative. And we've got statistically significant increases here on measures of well-being, self-compassion, and compassionate leadership, and a small improvement in compassion for other, but it didn't quite reach significance. And then on the satisfaction ratings, on a scale of 0 to 9, it's pretty much around 8. And then these are some of the things from the qualitative that we picked out. Obviously, we picked out the best bits. But they represent some of the things that people got from them. So you can read that. I think that the things that strike me about what people say quite often are, we do quite a bit about listening, and this is often a group of clinicians who are quite trained in listening, but they still find that actually discovering that as a leader to be able to listen really well is so crucial. That's something people mention. And also the other thing is the yang compassion, that compassion can be about courage, about calling things out, about standing up for what you value and things like that. Okay. So we've got 5 minutes or so just for sort of, we could have a brief conversation. Anybody, any sort of reflections or comments or questions that you might have just before we finish? John.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation and for the opportunity to think and to reflect on this. One thing that occurred to me, well, a couple of things, was one of the environments I work in is HE. And what we often find is it's much easier for individuals to show compassion towards others, primarily students, and not so easy towards themselves. And so it was interesting to hear you talk about the kind of balance and the focus on that within your course. But the other thought I had was the relationship with coaching skills and really effective practical coaching skills. And you know, my wife at the moment is doing a level 5 coaching course, and actually an enormous amount of that is theoretical. And she's had to wade through that, but now she's getting to the practical stuff. And it is those kind of ready skills, those ready strategies that you can apply very easily, and then you really need to practice, so that you can develop a kind of embodied and intuitive way of accessing those. And I was thinking about how much they facilitate compassionate engagement within the workplace. And I was also thinking about ways then that within, you know, particular workplaces that I work in, coaching might be a way to bring in some compassion, because there might be an openness to it because of the implicit recognition that coaching is a good thing for leaders to engage in.
Yeah, great. That sounds great. I don't know too much about coaching, but that sounds great. And I think the thing about training as practice is not that familiar in a lot of workplaces. It's sort of more, you want to train staff to do something, you put together a set of things that's basically information and you give it to them. And actually the idea that you need to just practice, that the information will stay and then go, but if you keep practicing, then something might more fundamentally change, I think.
Yeah, I'm forever being asked to bring things down to a one-off session and keep communicating. Actually, the evidence suggests that if we engage in this over a period of time, we form a relationship with these practices, it's going to be much more sustainable, much more impactful. But yeah, it can be a challenge getting that message across.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. Thank you. Any other comments? Jane.
I suppose I just wanted to say that we're talking about the workplace, self-compassion in the workplace. And I guess that's because we spend a lot of time in our workplace, and also because, as you said, there are benefits. But really, the wider motivation for me is about society. If we try to practice self-compassion individually and in work, the ripple effects are out in society. So yeah, I mean, of course, work's important, but there's more important things like how we connect with each other, you know, outside of work.
Yeah, definitely. And you know, I think the mindfulness and compassion work actually is very helpful in that there isn't really a clear separation between personal and professional in this. You know, if you do mindfulness practice, it's going to have an impact wherever you go, right? Whatever you do. It's not, it's just like we're just focusing on workplace as one arena for the application of this. But as you say, if you're practicing a compassion or mindfulness skill, it will reverberate wherever you go, right? Or the opposite. Yeah. Great. Well, I think we're pretty much at time there. Thank you very much for coming, and I'm just sorry I haven't had time to hear all about. I'm sure lots of you are doing this kind of work as well. It'd be lovely to hear what you're doing. But thank you for coming and for what you're doing, and